Hello and welcome to a new panel discussion of the Ethical Commerce Alliance series. We are here today for the first time with a live audience in our beautiful office in Gijón, and we're going to talk about the perils of prediction, powerful conversion, or deceptive analytics. To discuss this with me are our founder of Empathy and CEO, Ángel Maldonado, Carissa Véliz, Oxford University professor for philosophy and author of the highly acclaimed Privacy is Power, and Rafael Jiménez, founder of Sealmetrics, the privacy-first analytics company. Welcome, everybody. So what is predictive analytics? From a very basic definition, it is a mathematical modeling tool to make a prediction about an unknown fact or an event in the future. So historical data is used for that, and the blanks are filled in with statistics. What has been proven very successful is a bit different when we try to make predictions about human behavior. There are some pitfalls and potential harms in there that we want to discuss today. Because how do we make decisions? According to Daniel Kahneman, he is an economist and a Nobel Prize winner, come to that. He created two systems. Systems one is the decisions that we make every day in the blink of an eye, subconsciously without really thinking about it. And systems two are these decisions that we take when we weigh out carefully before we come to a conclusion. But those make up just 2% of all our decision-making processes. So how can we convince someone to choose one product over the other when the decision-making is so, when lots of the decision-making happens so subconsciously? And how can we even make a prediction about their next actions? So, Ángel, maybe you would like to start and comment on that to begin with.
Yeah, well, the mind is a mystery, and for the most part, and it remains a mystery. And naturally, we tend to try to know the mind and the way people behave. And the question is, in that craving, on that desire of wanting to know why people behave in certain ways, what do we sacrifice? You know, wanting to know is a noble interest, but what do we sacrifice in that exercise? And it has ethical implications when we try to reason the way somebody makes a choice. And perhaps, I think it's a fair metaphor, that we think that people make choices the way lifeless objects exhibit behavior. Because it's a lot easier to understand a ball rolling down a hill than an ant going up the hill in mysterious ways. Yeah. So I think we have come to mechanistically, in a reductionist manner, understand human behavior, sacrificing so much. And what I find very interesting is that we do that because of a feeling, because of a desire, because of a craving to wanting to know behavior. So it is paradoxical that because we desire to know, we decide not to know people's complexities and people's feelings. So it has ethical implications to objectify individuals in that manner at the expense of trying to know choices and behaviors and intents. And what do you think about those ethical implications, Carissa?
Yeah, they're very problematic. And it's so, in a way, it's so presumptuous and so entitled to think that we can just have a claim to know whatever it is we want to know, when, of course, there are reasons for why we shouldn't allow certain companies, certain governments, certain people to know certain things. And, of course, prediction and the data economy and all that have a lot to do with inferences. And the current thinking seems to be that if you make an inference, that is your proprietary information, and you are free to do whatever inference you may want to do, because it's probabilistic, right? So that's a theory of it. But of course, the practice of it is that once an inference gets made, it gets used as if it were a fact. So if you have, say, a 90% of getting cancer because of your genes or the kind of food you're eating at the supermarket or wherever it is, you might well not get cancer. You might be in the 10%, but you will get treated as if you had cancer. And that has all kinds of implications for how people go through their lives and the kind of opportunities they have access to and the kind of treatment they get from companies and governments and institutions.
I think that is very complex to make a decision. In my case, 4 years ago, we created our own predictive marketing algorithm, and we had a company that is predicting the behavior of the cookies of the users. And when we created this algorithm, we can predict which 20% of the cookies of the users are going to generate the 80% of the revenue of the company, of the website visitors. And at the beginning, we were very happy, very big results. But one day, during the pandemic, I was with my old son, very bored at home, close at home. And I told him, I want to teach you how to find information in internet, in Google, in YouTube, Wikipedia. And then we found that it started with come on, let's go to the first website. And then the cookie consent pop-up show up, and then should I accept it? And then I was going to say, obviously, yes, because I earn money thanks to the cookies. But in this moment, I stopped, my brain started to think very quick, and then, yes, wait a moment, because my company is not, we have not investors. We were in 8 people working remotely, and if we could predict the behavior of the user just with very few data, we can predict the behavior of the user, and then I started to think, what can do Amazon or the big techs, what can do with the data of my son? I wouldn't like to be that my son be profiled by the big tech with 9 years. And then thanks to thanks to the pandemic, unfortunately, now we have created Seal Metrics. That is a web analytics privacy first, and we don't track people. Because I needed to find a solution for my family, for the people, and for me as marketer.
Yes. And it works, right?
Yes.
You don't need the personal data in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good.
So that's super interesting. It seems to me that there's so much dogma around this area. People just assume that more data is better and that it will work better. And then when you offer them empirical evidence that actually if you use less data, you can be just as successful, they're like, no, something has to be wrong. The assumption is that because all these big companies do it, surely they must be right. And in a sense, it's very little curiosity to actually test the world and see what the world tells you back.
Exactly.
And Google is teaching the companies that your company has to recollect as many data as you can to start to generate revenue.
Yes.
If you're not collecting data, you are not going to sell. And then this is very dangerous play, because now the e-commerce, the websites we are becoming to be the collector of data from the big techs.
Absolutely. And with Google in particular, there's something that is, I find, especially deceiving. And that's this idea that Google is developing products for the benefit of people. It's like, oh, look at this free product, look at this Google Maps, and look at this Google Docs, and really, it's just another way to collect more data and different kinds of data, but it never gets presented that way.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm happy to add something to that, because you spoke about creativity and you spoke about your son and how interesting it is that as a marketer, as digital professionals, a lot of people don't stop to think the way they will see things from the perspective of a consumer, which is a bit of a hypocrisy. They approach their users in ways they wouldn't dare to be approached. And suddenly you find yourself with your son and you realize that this cycle of value you're providing, it can be also affecting yourself. And that sets a different score. And for people, when digital professionals and the digital community, they start to see in this light, they make a switch of no return, of which I'm very happy. And as per imagination is very interesting, and how much data you can have. I think it's Popper who said data is like a wall. That how tall can this wall be? You know, data, datum, given, dado in Spanish, is something that you cannot take passively. You have to take actively, and therefore the notion of imagination. We have come to put our minds, our decisions, our innovation at the service of data, as opposed to the other way around. And when you speak imagination, you know, imagination is not just to see things that you don't see. Imagination is about creating a whole new world. It's a proper exercise of, you know, endless creativity, and that cannot be subjected in line to data. We have come to think that innovation is data-driven. It's an accepted concept, but certainly it's not.
Data, I think, is very useful, but just, you know, you have to be very careful with personal data. You said that data is something, you have to give something actively, and the same goes for consent. We click accept so often every day, or not, hopefully not. Always reject cookies, but we do it so often just to get on and to move on. But because this is how human behavior works, coming back to our original topic, Carissa, maybe you can say something more about how we're nudged into consent and about dark patterns, how those work really.
Yeah, consent is a really interesting topic. So the concept of informed consent comes from medical ethics. And the idea is that the doctor is supposed to explain what you have, what are the options, what are the probabilities, and it's up to you and your values to decide what to do. And this is a way to protect the patient because only you know what your values are, and this is not only a medical decision, this is a value-laden decision. And of course, I think it was well-intentioned to use consent in the data world, but totally misguided, because there's no way to give informed consent about personal data. For one thing, you have no idea what kind of inferences that data will lead to, and neither does a person collecting the data know. So they can't inform you. If they don't know, you certainly can't know. And because data gets shared and sold and so on, you have no idea in which hands it'll end up, whether it's going to be a criminal or a company or a dictator or whoever. And so there's no, the idea of informed consent is basically a mirage. And yes, dark patterns are particularly worrisome because they give the impression that people are consenting, that people are happy with whatever practices are done, and in fact there's this whole army of designers that work to game your instincts. So of course we've all seen these dark patterns. You get the cookie banner or the cookie alert, and of course the button that says yes to cookies is bright and, you know, green or something like that, and the button that says no to cookies is barely visible. And so there's this whole industry to essentially deceive us.
But I think that I can't understand why I have to make a bigger effort to protect my privacy, my privacy, than to share my privacy. Yeah. I don't understand, because if the privacy is our bigger asset that we have, like as human beings. So I can understand this. Why the regulations is not in another way. I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's as if we have forgotten of the common sense, because many of these things don't make sense. But you know, luckily, common sense always wins, as we see with the change that we are right now experiencing, is leaning towards common sense and away from these inadequacies. Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a lot of lot more and higher awareness of individuals about what happens to their data with every data breach that happens. I think this increases exponentially, and I think we're in a good way that this is going to change. But this is not just about the policies that we said. Everybody can take action and can reject cookies, for example, individuals, but also it's an industry matter to make better, safer products for a more collaborative, new way of working and on the internet, especially during times of a pandemic, where so many of us spend so much more time in there. So yeah, but I would like to look into another aspect of human behavior. What leads us to a buying decision? Why do we choose one product over the other? And why is it brand A or brand B? Is it just, are we driven by economics, by rationality, or are we slaves to our instincts and impulses? Where does this, who would like, Rafa, do you want to take this question?
Well, I think that we have to give to educate to the user to take to make the decision to share his privacy to the other companies. When you are working with predictive algorithms, the big problem that I found was that the user didn't know that they were in the algorithm process. Mm-hmm. And then this is a little, ethically, it's a little bit it's uncomfortable in this way.
Rafa, let me go one step further then. Why do we have to predict?
Why?
Why do we have to predict the behavior? And therefore, why do we have to ask for that data? Because my standpoint is that no data, no profiling data, no personal data at all is required. Because, and let me share the intent of my question, I don't believe there is value in trying to predict behavior, because I believe behaviors are unpredictable. I think we have come to believe too much about that. So the question is, why is on the trade, in the business, in the exchange of value, the idea of predicting? This morning I went for a swim, Borja, I believe, is here, and we checked the weather forecast of this city and it said it was not raining. And actually it was raining, and the app said no rain, 0% rain, and I was under the rain. It was not even prediction. Still today we cannot predict the weather, So why do we have brought ourselves into this dynamic of wanting to sell predictions? Let's take it off for a moment, and let's think that perhaps it's not that important, and we have to resort to imagination and to creating things that we know can evoke certain feelings that agree constitutionally with human nature. Perhaps we got carried away with this idea of predictions. Is it so much required?
I'm going to be very sincerely. And I think that when you invest in a predictive algorithm, you invest because it's easier to invest in mathematics than in creativity or imagination. For example, for a lot of marketers, it's easier to create a remarketing campaign for Group A. Group A is buying intent high, high buying intent, than to think about how can I adapt my product, and how, they don't invest time listening, talking with the customers, but it's easier, cheaper, even cheaper to start an algorithm, a predictive algorithm, than to talk with your customers. If the companies, the marketers, start to do the old marketing, the marketing of the 90s, 80s, the brand.
Mad Men marketing.
Yes, more or less. But obviously, I have talked with a lot of marketers, and I explained that that you have to comply with GDPR, privacy of the user. A lot of marketers said, and now I don't have data then to check for making decisions. What can I do? Just do marketing. If I don't know the people that is visiting my website, if I don't know more information about them, how can I offer a better product? The same that in the 80s or in the 70s, you know that this newspaper have this profile of users, these TV shows, and it's cheaper to invest in mathematics than in imagination, creativity.
Nothing that's easy is worthwhile, right? Sorry, Carissa, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's, in a sense, there's a parallel in just general economics. It's cheaper and easier to exploit people than to actually collaborate and have a positive relation, but it's so much more worthwhile to have the latter. And I totally agree. I remember as a kid watching TV shows about ads. You wanted to watch it. Like, it was a collection of ads of like the best ads of the year.
Yes, yes.
And this was like a family moment.
Oh,
It was an
yes.
exciting moment because ads were funny, they were
Yes.
clever, had good aesthetics. And today there's nothing like that.
Yes.
You couldn't even put a 5-minute collection of good ads in the year.
Yes.
And that's because ads have gone from providing information and providing something valuable to people who wanted to watch them, to taking from us, to taking information. And that's completely flipping the whole ad industry. I think the founders of marketing wouldn't be impressed at all.
It's very interesting. I mean, this idea of, as you're saying, why we choose product A or product B, and I've always been fascinated by how we make choices. It is such an incredibly interesting topic. And you can think about why do we blush, or why do we sneeze, or why do we cough, or why do we, without knowing, reach to a glass of water, or right on the opposite side of the spectrum, why Truman decided to send a nuclear bomb. It's quite a distance. But I'm more interested in the choices that we make apparently recognized to be more conscious, apparently. As Cunningham says, there is in that consciousness a lot more instinctive choices. And this is, I have come to conclude that I really love your answer, Rafa, because what if we don't know? What if it's okay not knowing? What drives a choice in its concurrency, in its concentric nature that involves so much from our mind, from our multiple minds and our multiple relationships and the real world around us outside of the flat land of a mere device screen. There is so much more than participates right there and then when we make a choice. Why do we have to know this, right? And of course, it results in a very uncomfortable space. Nobody wants to confront something that is in this array, is chaotic, unless my 16-year-old likes his messy room. But for the most part, people like things to be meticulously organized, and this applies to knowledge, right? And as you say, it's perfect, we just have come to stop thinking creatively and wait for us to be told what is that which is going to be the thing to do, which is going to work safely, and I'm going to be protected in my choice, as opposed to throwing yourself into the realm of an empty canvas and just running that terrible risk of making choices, right? And understanding that people, all in all, as the marketers, original marketers, they wanted to experience things, to be surprised, to become relatable, to augment and define themselves with the things that they buy, because they are beautiful, because they hold some aesthetic quality, because they feel endorsed, or whatever other things that you don't have to mathematically know. You can embark on it creatively, right?
No,
Yeah.
I think they put a lot more emotion and more of their hearts and of their whole beings into the next advertising campaign than trying to predict it makes it boring, because you know the outcome, or you're aiming for a specific outcome, and then you said it like it makes it cheaper and faster, but does it make it more trustworthy? For does the user or the buyer that you're aiming for to convince to come to a buying decision to choose your product over another one, will they be, do you offer trust so they can make that choice voluntarily, or do you want to just to fulfill your prediction and the prophecy that you make with the intention? Does data really help us there, or are there more factors in human behavior to drive that?
Yeah, I think just as an introduction to you, Carissa, on the whole idea of nudging customers, persuading them, creating psychological tricks, predictive irrationality and all those theories, that the moment you apply them, the moment you create a menu in a restaurant, options for a subscription, options for pricing, that induce the customer in these scarcity techniques and these persuasion techniques, you start to abuse. You start to think of that person not as a person, but as a user, right? And that's the ethical inadequacy, right?
Yeah, and if we think again about medical ethics as an analogy, what we see in medicine is that we went from not valuing autonomy at all to valuing autonomy a lot. So if you read medical ethics codes from, say, the 1890s, it said that your duty as patient was to obey the doctor, no questions asked.
Yeah.
Sometimes you didn't even get a diagnosis. It was, you went to the doctor, they said, take this, and that was it. You had to take it. And sometimes you were included in clinical research and you didn't even know. And of course, the job of medical ethics has been to empower the patient and to give them autonomy and to lessen the power asymmetry between doctor and patient. And what we're seeing now in the digital realm is that we value autonomy zero.
Yes.
So the user is just something that's going to bring us money. And oftentimes we don't even get asked, what do we want? How can products enhance our life? And in this case, I think a genius like Steve Jobs has had a bit of a double-edged sword and effect in this. Because on the one hand, a company, he created a company that is very mindful of design, that is very user-friendly in many ways. But Steve Jobs has this quote that has always kind of chilled me, that says something like, I'm misquoting, so you can search the right words, but something like, we don't need to know what people want. We will design things that make them realize what they want. And of course, that's a very dangerous thought to have, because it means like, yeah, we don't need to know anything about you. We don't need to ask you what you want. We don't need to give you any kind of power. We can just like tell you what you're going to want, yeah. Which of course doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah.
It's not very democratic.
Was that the quote, we don't have to predict the future and make it, or is that a different thing? I don't know.
It's related.
It's related. Yeah, it's the danger of quotes, right? They can cut down so much, yeah?
Yeah,
Rafa, what are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I think that thinking about tricks for increasing sales and predictive as a trick for increased revenue, I think that the new brands, especially the new online brands, are losing a very big opportunity to increase revenue and conversions because they are not working the brand. They are not taking the ethic, privacy as a core in the DNA of the brand. They are only focused to switch on Google Ads campaigns, switch on Facebook Ads campaigns, and to start to regenerate ROI. But this system can work at the beginning, probably. But in the long term, you have to have a very strong brand if you want to create a long-term company. And I think, like Steve Jobs, when you visit the apple.com, then the UX, the experience, the product, all is amazing too. I want to buy, but they don't need that. They don't need to predict that I am going to buy.
Yes.
Just create great product, great UX, great customer success, great brand, great values, transmit the values, communication, the old school marketing.
Old school marketing. Pre-2007, 2008. Where no SQL databases came about, cheap, big-scale computational complexity, and the industry decided to build things because you could build things. We can compute big data, let's build things about big data. There's not such thing as big data, but big customer data. So then we begin from there and we work our way down to the user, and which created all this chain and subsequent network of ad hoc nonsense. As you say, before big data and before this cheap computational capacity, people had to be forced to resource to more creative approaches and to think, I'm going to create a new brand. How do I make this absolutely irresistible? And I begin with that.
But this is difficult to think.
Very difficult, very uneasy.
But this is the path. This is the way.
Good.
I think Rafael is right to mention the long term. There's a short term and a long term. And we're seeing that now people are becoming very desensitized to ads. From using ad blockers to just people absolutely ignoring ads because they're so invasive, they're so uninteresting, they're all the same, that they're not having the effect that they had 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and especially with young people. So if you don't have a strong product and you only have ads, and those, are not becoming that effective, then you're in trouble. And I think it's also worth mentioning all the negative externalities and risks of the ad market as it works today, with real-time bidding. So it turns out that the same people who created the subprime mortgage market created this market of real-time bidding. And both markets suffer from many of the same problems, one of which is they're very obscure markets. Yeah. So if you bought an ad in a newspaper, say 20 years ago, you went on a Sunday, you bought the newspaper, you checked that the ad was there, and then, that's it. You know that you people are seeing your ad. Yeah. But of course today, if you buy an ad, say for people in the other side of the world who are 20 to 30 to watch this ad, you will never be able to verify that. Yeah. So there's an incredible amount of click fraud and frauds of all kinds. So, estimates vary, but there are some estimates that suggest that 30 to 50% of ads never actually get seen by anyone. Oh, wow. So this is creating a financial bubble that when publishers realize that they've been spending a lot of money, because these ads are very expensive, that's another thing. That targeted ads are much more expensive than old-fashioned ads. And when publishers realize that they've been spending all this money in something that wasn't really what was promised, there might be a financial crisis.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And I think that there is a data bubble as well, because I think that Seth Godin said once that all the brands are talking about they are customer-centric. Yeah. But when you see I think that since the iOS 14, that 97% of the users, they don't want to be tracked. Yes. And when you are seeing that 30%, 40% of the users are not rejecting they are just rejecting cookies, then a second. Then Seth Godin, yes. And then the brand has to understand that the people don't want to be tracked. Yes. But then you are not customer-centric, you are data-centric. When you are force the users to accept cookies, then you are not customer-centric, you are data-centric.
Until your son sits in front of the computer. So please sit your sons in front of the computer and let's design digital products for our children. My daughter had YouTube Kids. Does anybody know what YouTube Kids is? Please delete it. Delete it. I don't imagine any executive, not even anybody in that company who has children, letting their kids use YouTube Kids. It has all these tactics. I remember in the 80s being with my dad in a Spanish bar and hearing those machines that people used to put money and try to get money out. And they had this sound, do. Well, YouTube Kids has that sound, do. And they try to nudge the kids, children, for God's sake, to try and see more of this silly content. Yes, silly content. And I always wonder if the people behind those products, their children, actually they hear them using those tools because they will not dare to, but somehow they develop those products. And the same applies to many other social media tools, etc.
You think then the audio, the sound has an impact on wanting you to watch more or to play more on those machines?
Well, it's not, they do think that. For sure.
I just find it annoying, but I think there are other factors that want us to play more and but this is a whole different topic, like how addiction works. It also touches upon that. Maybe Carissa, you want to say something about addictions from a philosophical standpoint.
Yeah, well, there's a whole controversy about whether we should talk about this as addiction, because, when we think about addiction to, say, a substance that might be different, at least biochemically, or part of it different. But the gist of it is, again, going back to autonomy, is that when you do something impulsively or addictively, and there's a gradient, so it's hard to tell, like, when is it addiction and when is it kind of impulsive. The point of it is that these companies are appealing to our kind of instincts and hijacking our instincts in a way that makes us do something that we wouldn't endorse. So when, New Year's comes around, nobody says like, oh yeah, this year I really want to spend more time on Facebook. Nobody does that, right? You want to read more, you want to spend time with your family, you want to whatever, do meaningful stuff. And then you end up spending more time on Facebook. And one of the dangers of hijacking our instincts is that you are turning citizens into subjects. And that has all kinds of implications for even politics, as we saw with Cambridge Analytica and other kinds of political firms that are actually still doing the same thing. That they are also appealing to our more based instincts like fear. And what kind of society are we building here?
That's an excellent question. And with that, I think we're almost at the end. We just have a couple of minutes left to take some questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question? No one really? Are there questions from LinkedIn? Oh, there is one.
What's your opinion?
Hold on, you get a microphone. Yes.
Hi. I want to know what's your opinion about Cambridge Analytics and how they manipulate the 2016 elections.
Yes.
There, using clustering and all these machine learning techniques.
Do you want to address this question to someone,
No,
or is it general to
a general response, if you
would like to take that?
Please, Carissa.
Carissa?
Yeah, sure. So it's a terrible example. I mean, it's an excellent example and a terrible one for the same reasons. And it shows, it's very illustrative. It's like even a textbook couldn't have done better to kind of show us the political value of privacy. So this is a case in which, first, it shows how collective privacy is. We have this narrative from big tech companies that privacy is only individual, that it's a personal preference, and in fact, it's as collective as it is personal, and as political as it is personal. So you have 270,000 people who give their data. They don't know what the data is being used for. They're just asked to fill in a survey, and they get paid $1. So it's a case in which 270,000 people sold democracy for $1. Because with that data, Cambridge Analytica got access to the data of 87 million friends of those original people who have no idea and didn't do a survey or anything like that, didn't consent or didn't have knowledge of this. And with that data, the firm tried to create a tool that would profile voters around the world. So we have that used in the US for the Trump campaign, we have it used in the UK for the Brexit campaign, and other places in the world, including Nigeria and so on. And many people tell me, well, what's the problem? Come on, propaganda has been there forever, so this is nothing new. And that's true. But this kind of propaganda is much more dangerous. Why? Because in the past, we had propaganda that everybody could see. So if a candidate said something outrageous, journalists would be criticizing it, academics would be on it, and ordinary people, you would be talking about it at work, talking about it with your family, and that creates perspective. What did the Trump campaign do? They used 6 million different ads, each one profiled to one kind of personality. And if this personality was somebody who was scared, then they would stoke that fear. If they were afraid of immigrants or of losing jobs or whatever it was, if you saw one of these ads, you wouldn't believe it. It was like a horror movie with like the eerie music and the dark colors. And it's really so obvious that they are hijacking our emotions and not appealing, not persuading us through rational means. So that's what makes personalized propaganda so dangerous, that it fractures the public sphere. Instead of looking at one ad that everybody we can talk about and criticize, we are in our own little ghettos, and yet we think we are seeing the world, but we're only seeing a reflection of what these companies think we are.
Interesting thought. I really like it. Any other questions? Borja, go on.
Hi, I was listening from upstairs. So let me be a bit of the devil's advocate. So if I'm a brand, you guys are thinking of, let's go back to the 80s and shoot to everyone. But I think we can do better, right? Say that I have a product for cyclists. How do I reach out? As a consumer, also I'm willing to listen to those, but I have no means to do it. So it's not about not being able to target, to go. It's about that should be demand-based rather than just being harvested, being tracked. So to me, there's a bit of a gap in there that we need to change the way we expose ourselves, right?
If I may say to that, we need to, Borja, redefine the opportunity or the problem in a very different schema. If we try to solve this problem that you describe, or trying to be relevant to a particular person that has a particular interest in a particular domain, with the schema of today's centralized model, where brands hold data, this data has a distance from where the person is, and by virtue of that fact, that creates mistrust. But if we throw all that away and we think of a different definition of the problem that is extreme demand-based, and we open up to the possibility of decentralization, not distribution, blockchain, decentralization, where you, Borja, become an extreme demand declaration, Borja's brand, and you become a platform, and you following vendor relationship management models or pods or this space that is growing architecturally through decentralization, brands come to you as opposed to you going to the brands, and you let them read as opposed to them writing your information. And they have to accept your terms as opposed to you having to accept their terms. I believe some of that is happening, and some of these alternative architectures and schemas are taking place. But we cannot solve this problem through a centralized mindset. It's very difficult to grasp this construct, but perhaps it is the very nature of what the internet was meant to be, as people refer to as Web 3.0 or whatever. Yeah, this problem needs a different definition, and to completely throw away this central interpretation of brands being surrounded by consumers, but consumers being surrounded by brands, and everything happening under the consumer terms, decentralization, etc. A topic of its own.
Give control to us as consumers, right? Yes. So when you go to a shop, rather than saying, would you give consent, you have no clues over what data, let alone the inferences that they're going to create around that. It should be more like in a physical world. You go into a store, you can be anonymous as you walk. I like the brand, I can tell you a bit more about myself. Yeah. It's this me-to-business kind of schema, right? But again, I think that it's not like personalization is evil. It is not. It's just that the relationship is totally decoupled. And we are, let alone, we are not empowered to make those decisions, even if we want to do so. Because of course, brands will create demand. They will do it. I mean, that's why brands exist, to create new demand, and because there is a need and there is people willing to pay for a new service, or to feel beautiful, or to feel they have the best bike, or to go travel and meet new places. And that's out there. It's how we make that happen, and do that in a healthy way with people. So I think that's the challenge, right? To brands that actually want to engage into that new relationship. How do we do it? And that's why we're all here, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Borja.
Elizabeth, I think there were some questions from LinkedIn. Do we have another minute to?
Yes.
I think one or two more questions.
Yeah, in case anyone's tuning in online, thanks for joining us. And not to worry if we don't get to your question right this moment, we'll reply for sure later. But I do want to raise one. It says, what about predictive analytics in terms of search and merge? In grocery, there can be hundreds of thousands of products available to buy. A visitor can only view a few hundred, unlike in a physical store. Without some sort of predictive algorithm, it could be a confusing, drawn-out experience?
Sure. Let's look at it in the following way. when we think of predictive analytics, we think of connecting the past to the future. So based on the brands and products that you bought in the past, you try to predict what are you going to do in the future. And surely that is helpful for repeated purchases, like the case of groceries. People tend to buy the same brand of milk, the same brand of beer, the same brand of whatever. Diet of beer and milk. But this has to coexist with respecting customers' privacy. And we cannot create more silos of customer data just to serve that necessary guideline. And also, a second important remark is that a lot of the choices that we make online are based on what we are doing then and there in the moment, in the now. So it can be frustrating when you decide to change intent and your previous purchases keep influencing and narrowing down what you see. So we have to run predictions, or I don't like to use the word predictions, intuitively anticipate and support a person by also looking at what they are doing, as Borja reflected, in the moment, in the now. So surely, yes, the answer is you need to have a way of intuitively supporting people's choices and providing shortcuts. But you not only have to depend on the history, you have to also listen to what they're doing in the moment. The beauty of doing that is that you don't have to write, you don't have to track, you can open a session and kill it, you don't have to write what somebody's been doing on the lanes of your shop, you can just pay attention to what they're doing as it happens in a physical shop. The analogy to the physical shop is so beautiful, so right and so fair, and that's what we should try to resource to. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. Thank you, everybody who joined online on LinkedIn. So if you have any more questions, ideas, or comments, feel free to share them with us on LinkedIn. And yeah, I hope you're going to join us again next time. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.